infinitely better than Expedition 33's. I do think we need to preface that now before like the game industry tries to start their narrative like, well, Expedition 33 is a new IP. It's like it has a distinct sound to it. It's the best RPG of the year. Like, first of all, none of that is true. And second of all, like, you are downplaying Mario Kart World's 10 out of 10 soundtrack to prop up some like no name, low budget, third party, like generic RPG from like the French. That's basically just amounts to like ripping off Japanese RPGs tropes while throwing in diversity in there. Like, that's like the reality behind Expedition 33 and its success is that it's a JRPG, but woke. And like I do think we really do need to come out and acknowledge that this is like it's no different than Undertale or like Disco Elysium or like that or Cyberpunk 2077, Baldur's Gate 3. Like this game doesn't really have an audience, like it has a handful of terminally online weirdos who obsess over it because they see it like being a fan of it as being a status symbol, right? They don't play a lot of games. They don't know what's actually out there. They don't have a well-rounded opinion. Like, to them, like, Expedition 33 needs to win in order to give it credibility. That's just the reality of the situation. Like, they don't really see, like, the award show as a means of, like, giving praise and attention to, like, the deserved winners. They see it as a method of, like, legitimizing their brand and their favorite thing, and this idea that like that people have that like Expedition 33 or Baldur's Gate 3 or whatever are like genuinely well-made, interesting games that are going to stand the test of time when they very clearly are not. Like Expedition 33 didn't even really last a couple of weeks before it was like outdone by other games, outstripped by other RPGs. And now, one of the things that, like, normies love to talk about when it comes to this kind of games to music, that has been 100% overshadowed by Mario Kart World. There is, like, no way that Mario Kart World, the soundtrack for that will not be more well remembered than Expedition 33. There's just no way, Like we're already kind of seeing this online. Like this game just has like banger soundtrack after banger soundtrack, remixes, originals, like fully orchestrated. It's just an amazing experience, right? Like Mario Kart World, like listening to these tracks is mind blowing. Hours and hours and hours of this stuff. And Expedition 33 just can't compete long term. Or even really in the short term. So, like, what these people are doing is what they've always done, and just defaulting to, like, thinking Jeff is going to save them, right? They think that the Game Awards are going to give Expedition 33, the award, and that's somehow going to, like, legitimize the game. That's kind of what we're seeing at this point. That's what we're seeing from these people, is that they think that, like, by having Expedition 33 be, like, handed all of these, like, industry awards from the Game Awards, like, that would, like, legitimize the game and make it, like, popular for, forever, right? Putting it up there with the all-time greats. And that's just not how this works. We've seen this time and time again. It doesn't matter what Jeff like gives the Game of the Year award to, because Nintendo is always going to beat it out. Eventually. People forget, like, they gave The Last of Us Part 2 the Game of the Year award. When Animal Crossing is the one that's like seen as like the game of the pandemic that like sold significantly more. That was this huge success story. Well, The Last of Us was hugely controversial. And that's far from an isolated incident. In 2023, they gave, The Last of Us HBO the Best Adaptation Award over the Mario movie. What did that result in? Season 2 just tanked the brand to the point where even Neil Druckmann had to, like, bow out with his tail in between his legs, to go back to work on The Heretic and The Last Prophet, which is also going to fail. Like, this is the reality of, like, the situation, is that they're using the Game Awards as a cope to justify, like, thinking that, like, Expedition 33 has, like, a shot in hell of being like recognized as being this authentically amazing game, when in reality it's like it's just kind of a crutch, because without the Game Awards, without that looming threat on the horizon, like it wouldn't even be a contest. Yeah, yes, of course Mario Kart World has a better soundtrack. Yes, of course Bonanza is going to be Game of the Year. Of course, like Nintendo Switch 2 is like this huge milestone thing, but that's not what the industry wants you to think. The industry delusionally wants to keep up this facade that Nintendo is perpetually failing, that they can't compete, that like Westerners are putting out like higher profile games all the time, and every year it feels like their attempts at doing this keep becoming more and more desperate. I thought it was like ridiculous in even when like Uncharted 2 came out, like how lackluster that was compared to like the games I was playing on Nintendo consoles at the time. I would notice like how I would put like hundreds of hours into Pokemon games and they would never get nominated for anything. I I've been talking about the. I talked about how these people always want to talk about sales, and suddenly we're nowhere to be found in the Wii and DS era. It's kind of remarkable how this industry bends over backwards to try and make Nintendo look like they're evil or that they're falling off or whatever, and they're simply incapable of acknowledging Nintendo's real, genuine successes. Like Mario Kart World, every aspect of it has to be damage controlled and has to be controlled. You can't say it's Game of the Year. You can't say that it's reasonably priced. You can't say it's a good launch title for Switch 2, and you especially cannot say that the game has better music than Expedition 33. The industry game, the controlled opposition that the game journalists have tried to prop up this year. You can't come out and say that, because that goes against everything they've been trying to accomplish this year. This goes against the wishes of their friends and their their advocates. This goes against woke culture and what they think should be popular. Right, Expedition 33 is it's interesting because games continue to be astroturfed just as much as they did during the mid 2000s, but these days these games come and go so quickly that they don't really leave much of an impression. I remember a lot of people were really shocked at how quickly BioShock Infinite was kicked from the cultural zeitgeist. After The Last of Us came out. Because there was legit. People forget this happened, but when BioShock Infinite came out, people really thought it was one of the greatest games of all time, with this incredible plot that really pushed boundaries in certain respects. BioShock Infinite was this hugely worshipped title for 3 months until The Last of Us came out. And then when The Last of Us came out, it buried it so badly, and it was the game they hyped up, BioShock Infinite was just completely forgotten. And that's the trend that we keep seeing, is that good third-party games are coming out, on all platforms, but over and over again they keep getting buried by absolute slop, like Expedition 33 or Astrobot or Baldur's Gate or Black Myth Wukong or whatever else, in order to continue pushing this narrative, the idea that gaming is becoming more diverse, or that we're more accepting of other people, or that this stuff is woke culture is in. How many times did we see during Baldur's Gate 3's relevancy period how many people tried to argue that it proved that go woke, go broke wasn't a real thing. That was obviously a giant cope, but that was legit a major part of their argument. And I think with Expedition 33, they're trying the same tactics and yet not necessarily reaching the same kind of results, because without the gratuitous sex scenes, none of these games will get any audience at all. That's been a really a reoccurring trend with Western RPGs. I think is that all anybody cares about in them is just banging their waifu or whatever, and a lot of times these games don't really deliver that, especially if they do that ugoification that Western games tend to do. So with all that being said, it's going to be really interesting over the next year or so to see like Expedition 33 just kind of fall by the wayside. A year from now, no one's going to remember it. No one's going to talk about it. No one's going to like bring up the soundtrack. And yet I can guarantee that people will be playing and talking about and acknowledging Mario Kart World's goated soundtrack. That is the reality. Like, it doesn't matter what the Game Awards say. It doesn't matter what people on Twitter say. Mario Kart World has already beaten Expedition 33 in what actually matters. The game is just better.